Hi, and welcome back to Foreign Office. I'm Michael Weiss, and today we're joined by a good friend of mine from the tri-state area who's hopping mad and is not going to take it anymore. The former president of Estonia, Toomas Ilves, or Tom as I call him. Tom, it's great to have you on. And you and I chat offline pretty much every day. And in the last 48 hours, 72 hours, I've noticed a dramatic increase in Fahrenheit in our conversations because of where to begin. It
Well,
started with the
normally we Estonians tend to be cool and calm and collected, but I mean, from two perspectives. One is, well, as a European, and seeing what the U.S. has done, but also worried about where the U.S. is going. That I mean,
yeah.
is rather abrupt break in not only the content but also the kind of rhetoric that we're getting from the United States directed at Europe, which I fear then will in turn have the opposite of whatever intended effects may be.
Well, let's back up a second, sort of set the stage here. So, a few days ago, the U.S. published its national security strategy, which, for the first time ever, devoted quite a lot of ink to Europe, not as an ally and friend and partner of the United States, which it has been going on 80 some odd years and only expanded in that capacity with the inclusion of more countries in NATO and the European Union, but really treating Europe as enemy terrain. That it was on a backward path politically, and that there's a very pregnant phrase in this document that says that the United States should cultivate resistance to the current European trajectory. So, in other words, treat the European political establishment as we would a foreign adversary like North Korea or Iran or Russia. In fact,
Well, it,
the document looks like something the Russian National Security Council or Foreign Ministry would put out. And in fact, a lot of Russian officials have been praising it. Peskov, Putin's press secretary, said, this completely aligns with our worldview and with our strategic mission. So,
and Dmitry Medvedev in his usual sober fashion.
right. But so let's
I
kind
mean,
of
it's more not. I mean, basically, if you read between the lines, it's calling for regime change,
right.
and that is utterly astounding.
Yeah.
And as I've said, it shows a complete lack of understanding of how the European Union or Europe works. Um, and it just, well, as I said, it's dangerous for, I think, from a European point of view. I think that it is in its cack-handedness. I think it will do the opposite of what it hopes, which is alienate people who otherwise have been, well, I mean, not really anti-American in any way. And in terms of own goals, is pushing people to be more supportive of the European Union, which
Yeah.
I repeat, is enjoys, with the exception of one country, which is Greece, enjoys overwhelming support. I mean, vast majorities across Europe uh, like the European Union. Now you're telling what you're telling these people you're all stupid or something. I mean,
Yeah.
this is not going to engender warm feelings toward the U.S. and it will, and it has caused the expected defensive reaction, which, I've not seen this actually before. But one of the responses, all these people on social media start putting up European flags. I'm
Hmm.
a European. I mean, that kind of outpouring just doesn't exist or has not existed in the past.
Well, a lot of listeners are American and maybe have some vague understanding of what the European Union is and what it's meant to do. But explain why you think that there's this widespread support for this supranational institution, and why people are putting up European Union flags. What is it about the EU that people in the member states enjoy, they like.
Well, it's life is better than being outside of it, for one, and especially if you're not a big country, you get considerable benefits, say with trade relations. I mean, that's getting. I'll come back to that. It's too specific. I mean, basically, what do you enjoy if you're an EU citizen? The Schengen zone. You can go anywhere in Europe. You can work anywhere in Europe if you're an EU citizen. You can live anywhere in Europe. I mean, that was not possible before,
Yeah.
uh, and now it is. Um, Now, when it comes to other matters, I mean, in foreign relations, you're much stronger, even as a small member. I mean, think of this whole tariff dispute that took place, which I suspect is part of the reason for this broad-based attack,
Yeah.
is that the EU is very hard to bully, and the EU is one of the things. I mean, member states give up or give to the European Union the right to negotiate trade deals. That's something that, which means that it has enormous clout. No country would be able to withstand that kind of pressure from either, either China or the United States
Hmm.
uh, alone. So those are the benefits we get. I mean, I can, as I said, EU citizens, you can live anywhere in Europe, work anywhere. Those are the kind
There,
of
there,
things that.
there seems also
All
to
right.
have been, all of the Euroscepticism from the 90s and the aughts, which culminated, I think, in Brexit, right? The UK has this
Yeah.
referendum, they vote to exit, and then they engage in this sort of agonized process of decoupling from the EU. I mean, a lot of it was predicated on disinformation and nonsense and false promises that, oh, the money that we're giving to Brussels will be spent on the NHS here and all these things. I mean, this is how Nigel Farage sort of cut his teeth as a
And
politician.
Boris Johnson
And
too.
Boris Johnson, too, who was a Telegraph correspondent in Brussels, who wrote these sort of witty dispatches about how, you know, sort of overweening the Eurocrat bureaucracy was, and so on and so forth. And yet, all of that nitty gritty, all of that sort of wonky legislation, these are the things that people actually crave, but without realizing why they crave it, which is, freedom of travel, freedom of movement, being able to work and live unhindered in 27
Going to school
countries,
anywhere,
going to school
going to
anywhere.
school.
Yeah,
Well, in fact, I mean, one of the best advertisements for the European Union is Brexit,
right,
since the decline of the UK since leaving, and now the again overwhelming majority of Brits would say that it was a mistake to leave the
right.
EU
And they were
because.
sold a bill of goods by the Brexit campaign or the Leave campaign.
And so
Uh,
now, I mean, as I said, I think that Brexit did a lot to boost support for the EU because, the kind of, oh, we should just leave the EU rhetoric, which was espoused by all kinds of various, mainly smaller nationalist parties, has evaporated. And even the ones who were uh, used to do this. I say, look at French Marine Le Pen's party, Rassemble, and AfD in Germany, and Wilders in the Netherlands. All parties that were before saying, "Oh, we're going to leave the EU." And now, with the results of Brexit that we see now, almost 10 years afterwards, and you see the decline of the UK and this illusion that suddenly we're going to have all these great trade relations with everybody and we're going to get lots of investment. That didn't pan out.
yeah.
So people appreciate the EU and have come to realize that life is not so good outside the EU.
Well, and we talk a lot on the show about the war in Ukraine, and it's helpful to remind people in 2014, the Euromaidan revolution was waged. Why? Because Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president who had campaigned, Party of Regions, his party campaigned on growing closer to the European Union and brokering this association agreement that would do just that, went back on his promise because he was offered a bribe by Putin. And this led to people lining the streets in Kyiv, and that's what prompted the Revolution of Dignity, right? Which then,
Which then prompted the annexation of Crimea, right?
exactly, exactly. And so, I mean, Ukraine, a country that's now fighting for its life, is desperate to be a member of the European Union and has submitted an application. So it goes to
Right.
show you, I mean, just how desirable this organization is. I mean, you were kind of integral in bringing Estonia into both the EU and NATO. Maybe you
Yeah.
could
I
talk a
did
little bit
all the
about that.
negotiations. I
Yeah,
mean, so from beginning to end. And well, you know, for me, it was clear that it was really the only possible way for a country like mine to survive, given that if you're not in the EU, you're subject to EU tariffs.
right.
Just I mean, so if you're already you're 75 well, at that point 75, now over 85% of your exports go to other EU countries. It'd be stupid not to be there from an economic point of view, not to mention from the point of view of the citizen.
I mean, NATO is another organization, alliance that's come under attack. You've got people like Michael Flynn, who was a very short-lived national security advisor to Donald Trump in term one, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, tweeting that it's time for the United States to withdraw from NATO. The current administration, if not going quite that far, has been quite down on the alliance. Originally it was everybody should meet their 3% GDP spending on defense. Then the goalposts were moved to 5%. There's been a pledge by all NATO allies to
We're
meet
going to
that
be,
benchmark.
Estonia's going to be there.
Right,
Poland's there. I mean,
right.
um, I think that, I mean, while the U.S. rhetoric on the EU is more unhinged, nonetheless, even within NATO, looking at the how countries are stepping up to provide for their own defense, shows that it's not true what they're saying.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, it is leading to something maybe what the U.S. wants, which is a European disengagement from NATO. Now, all along the history of NATO, from the very beginning, has always been one of the United States wanting to damp down any kind of European aspirations to any kind of defense other than via the United States. And in fact, probably one of the biggest fights that between the EU and the United States till now was the St. Malo Declaration, I guess, of 1998, in which there was a declaration that the EU would strive to have an autonomous defense policy. And the U.S. just came down so hard on that. It was just, I mean, kind of as hard as right now they're coming down on the European Union.
Right.
But currently, again, the level of the rhetoric and the fallaciousness is absurd. I mean, just these utterly false tropes about the European Union, unelected bureaucrats. I mean, like, where do we get this? Well, I know where you get it, but it's false, and people here know it's false. Every one of the, I mean, you can think of the European Commission, which is under attack by the US, as an analog to a cabinet. Well, any EU commissioner is, first of all, is nominated by a member state. So, I mean, so democratically elected member state nominates a person. Almost every single one has been a democratically elected politician. If you look across the EU Commission, they're all former prime ministers, foreign ministers, and so forth. And then they go through the same process. They have to be vetted and they have to be approved by the European Parliament. Now, let's contrast that to the United States, where, well, first of all, the president can nominate anyone. No one's ever, no one, no one, I'm going to say that Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yeah.
No, or even
You,
Harold Lutnick is,
you've
I
got
mean,
you've got Senate confirmation, which would be the closest thing to a kind of
well,
democratic certification. But even that is not, I mean, National Security Advisor is just an appointment that doesn't require confirmation, right? And that's a very powerful portfolio. And one of the
well,
guys who is an author of this national security strategy, Michael Anton, um, never held elected office in his life, was a C-suite member for Citigroup and BlackRock, and is basically saying, I am the real tribune of democratic Europe, more so than the EU, which strikes me as ridiculous, and I'm sure strikes a lot of Europeans as ridiculous as well.
or certainly the Deputy Secretary of State in his vitriol directed against the EU about unelected bureaucrats. Wait a minute, this is unelected bureaucrats. I mean, look, the leaders of the cabinet, the commission, they're basically all elected. Not only do they go have get a Senate committee, as it were, but they first of all have to get the equivalent. Say the foreign minister has to be approved first by the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, of which I was vice president back in the day, and then it has to be approved by the whole Parliament.
Yeah,
Now, and then this, and below that is the civil service,
right.
U.S.'s service.
Well, every country
Um,
has a civil service. I mean,
and so
yeah,
who are these
right.
unelected bureaucrats? I mean, if you say that, okay, lower down the unelected bureaucrats. Yeah, look at the DOD, the biggest bureaucracy in the world.
Well, something
Um,
that I think a lot of people don't appreciate as well is, the EU works by consensus. So, for instance, sanctions on Russia, everyone has to agree to put out a sanctions package, right? Including Hungary and Slovakia, the two most
right.
Eurosceptic countries in the EU. So, I mean, it's always a negotiation or it's a shakedown by Viktor Orban and his government. Give us more money and we'll meet you at point X on punishing the Russians, which is not something we want to do, and so on. So it's a wrangle. But any organization like this is going to consist of horse trading and the rest of it. That doesn't make it anti-democratic or undemocratic, right? I mean, if anything, it's quite the opposite. Um, but let's kind of analyze philosophically what is driving this by the United States. I mean, you make the point, the creation of the EU was largely at the prompting of the American government. The creation of NATO, obviously, was, an American conceit. And now, all of a sudden, the things that the United States has always endorsed and aligned with and seen itself as kind of almost
I
a
would say, I mean, in many ways, the initial organization that grew into the EU
right,
was done at the urging of the U.S. government
right,
by the U.S. High Commissioner for Germany, who basically said, you guys, you got to start cooperating,
right.
and from there on in through the years, it's always been, Dwight Eisenhower, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, all of them were always wanted the EU because basically what does the EU do? It is first of all, um, it's an economic equivalent to NATO in many ways. The overlap is enormous.
Hmm.
It is something that guarantees a stable partner for the United States. The trade has been enormously beneficial to the United States. And so,
And
I
I think
mean,
most importantly for the United States, it keeps the countries in the EU from going to war with each other, from
right.
having a
Well, that was the
continent-wide.
initial impulse, right? That was
Right,
how it started out. It was like
right.
we don't want to have the Germans and the French invading again. This is
Right.
yeah.
And now we have a national security strategy that says let's destabilize this consensus. Let's promote, I mean, this is the subtext of it, right? JD Vance interfered in the last German election on behalf of Alternative for Deutschland, the far right party, which has, I forget how many seats in the Bundestag, but basically trying to prevent Friedrich Merz, the now chancellor, from becoming chancellor of Germany. It's very clear the subtext of this strategy is let's do more of that. So let's get
Right.
behind far
Well,
right
it's
populist
regime
parties
change,
across Europe.
basically. Regime change is what
Regime
what
change, yeah, yeah,
and I mean, again, you ask why? Well, I mean, the one motivation might be, okay, if you're really hung up on tariffs, it is annoying to have to deal with an EU rather than being able to bully any single, I mean, all the single member states individually, because even Germany, you can bully Germany. It's 82 million people. So you can do that if you don't have a European Union.
right,
Now, I don't know if tariffs are driving this, but in any case, and then we had I mean, the simultaneous, more or less, decision by the EU to fine Elon Musk's X for violations that had nothing to do with censorship. I mean, they got the
right.
fine because he was he was fraudulently putting up blue check marks for money, deceiving people. That was not doing what other platforms do, which is give access to information for researchers. I mean, these were like, I mean, it was a minor fine too. I mean, what, 120
40.
million
Yeah. I mean, that's
for,
loose change in the couch cushions for Elon Musk. I mean, but
right.
but this is the thing that there's this idea of treating the EU. And this comes from, I mean, European leaders had been talking like this for decades, right? Morally equating the EU with a kind of new totalitarianism, right? This was the new kind of communist empire. I mean, you've heard this from blimpish
Oh, I've
figures in
heard
the
it for,
Czech
yeah,
Republic and so on. Now these currents have wafted over to the United States, and they're being kind of spat back at Europe by, South African tech bros, people from Silicon Valley who are largely responsible for Donald Trump's reelection. I mean, they paid the bills for his campaign. They were out front. I mean, JD Vance is very much a creature cooked up by Silicon Valley. Peter Thiel is his kind of Krisha, as the Russians would say. I mean, it looks to me like a government that was sort of out there on the hustings saying we don't want to interfere in the affairs of other countries, that we want to kind of build Fortress America. Not only do they want to interfere in the affairs of other countries, but they're interfering in a relationship that was created by the United States and that has kept Europe from war with itself for 80 years. It's one of the most successful projects of the 20th century, and they want to tear it asunder. And they're doing so almost in lockstep with the Russian government. I mean, this is exactly what Russia wants. Divide the United States from Europe, dismantle the European Union, get Brexit to happen all across the board so that Russia can pick off individual countries, smaller, vulnerable countries such as Estonia, rather than have to deal with a bloc.
right.
Um, you know, a conspiracy theorist might say, like, this sounds like Moscow and Washington are kind of coordinating a joint strategy, or this is realignment occurring in real time here. And Donald Trump very much,
If you follow the constant tweeting by Kirill Dmitriev
yeah,
via VPN because Twitter
is
or
banned.
X is
Yeah.
banned in Russia, but so he's
Great
disingenuine.
exponent of freedom of speech, Kirill Dmitriev needs a VPN just to get on Twitter to tell you about the erosion of freedom of speech in Europe, right?
It's just utterly bizarre. Nonetheless, I mean, we'll see how it goes. I mean, there's this. What is also striking is the tone of U.S. officials, um, which again, this hectoring, this abrasive
Yeah.
uh, and bullying on the part of U.S. officials. And I've been writing this piece basically reminding people that in 2020, the PRC, the People's Republic of China, embarked on something they called wolf warrior diplomacy. which was this in-your-face, really nasty diplomacy toward other countries, which was threatening and bullying and insulting. And it was abandoned fairly quickly. And in fact, the spokesman of the sort of like the Zaharova of the PRC, the spokesman for was would would like regularly broadcast these like really obnoxious statements. One day, the Chinese Communist Party realized this was backfiring, and suddenly he was shunted off to like a minor consulate position somewhere else. And that was the end of wolf warrior diplomacy because it was an utter failure. I
Right.
mean, it did the exact opposite of what they wanted. I mean, um,
But there is this
and I think
notion, I mean, this is the kind of the corollary to what we're seeing here, which is with the reelection of Donald Trump, it's well past time for Europe to develop its own security sovereignty, its own architecture that is independent of the United States. And, one of the frustrations, I mean, Gabrielius, who was on the show, the former Lithuanian foreign minister, a good friend of yours, he's been banging on about this for a long time, which is let's take this seriously. This is not posturing, this is not rhetoric. Now it's being codified as a national security doctrine of the United States. Let's take seriously that Europe and America are, diverging. And let us, take America at its word when it says we need to spend more money on our own defense and rearm and create our own sort of foreign policy. There's a lot of frustration that Europe is lagging behind, that it's not doing this as quickly as it should. I mean, Germany is an outlier now because the real Zeitenwende has happened under Merz, who has, I mean, committing, you know, billions and billions of dollars to weapons manufacturing. And, now there's this recruitment drive to join the German military and so on and so forth. But other countries, with the exception of the Baltic states and the Nordic states, which I've talked about, which are spending, more money on Ukraine as a percentage of GDP than other Western European NATO allies spend on their own defense, namely
right,
like Spain. But there is this sense Europe needs to move quicker.
yeah.
Uh, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what should be done that isn't being done? I mean, you certainly have the capital. You have the resources galore. It's a question of political will. Maybe is the political will now going to form in reaction, in opposition to this sort of full frontal
Well,
assault by the United States?
I think what's needed in Europe is actually a lot more economic integration for several reasons.
Yeah,
One is that Europe does lag behind the United States on tech and innovation. It does so for a fairly simple reason, which is that we do not have a single capital market. Every country has its own capital markets, which means it's one reason why all kinds of European startups move to the US because you have all of this private equity floating around, looking for places to invest in. Now, so one thing needs to be done is to create a unified capital market. This is one of the things that was proposed by former Italian Prime Minister Draghi. Another one of his proposals was to allow the EU to take out a loan, which it cannot do now. It did it once as an exception, and that was in 2020 to pay for COVID vaccines, which obviously would have cost far, far more if every
right.
country itself had to do it. Now, those are like fundamental changes. Those are the kinds of things which you need to do in order to get better investment in tech, much more investment in rearmament, and those things currently are lagging, and but they're necessary for the EU to stand on its own. So the political problem is actually enacting certain economic reforms. It's moving. I mean, I suspect, or at least I hope. I mean, I haven't talked to anyone today, but I mean, I would say that after the past 4 or 5 days, there is probably a shift in the needle has moved
Mm.
on these issues, and will I think I hope at least, galvanize countries to move more in that direction. And of course, that is the opposite direction to what the United States with the NSS security strategy has been pushing these days, which is greater integration on the part of the European Union. Um, so we'll see. The other thing I just wanted to mention, since you do mention my New Jersey provenance,
I didn't by name, but now you have, so there you go. I like to
when,
joke, collective security for us means Queens and Jersey, you know, standing up for the free world. Even though so
but
much of the current unpleasantness comes from Queens, maybe not Jersey, but my apologies on behalf of my hometown.
well, Kushner comes from New Jersey, so
Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah.
so we have. But I mean, as you can tell from my accent, I mean, my linguistically formative years were in the United States as the child of refugees from communist rule. And my relatives who didn't get out, ended up in Siberia, in the Gulag. Um, so I grew up in the United States, probably more attuned to the issue of freedom, human rights, democracy, rule of law, more than most people were, because I knew what its absence was, like,
Mhm.
why can't I go visit, you know, I can't because that's Soviet Union, and probably led to my infatuation already in an early age with reading things like John Locke's Two Treatises on Government. Where the hell did this come from?
Right.
Why is it? Why do you have separation of powers? Why do you have the Bill of Rights? I mean, the United States was the first country really to enact in its legislation, I mean, it's basically birth certificate, the ideals of the Enlightenment, which had only been discussed by philosophers. And then came the founding fathers, who then had read the philosophers and said, well, why don't we do it?
Yeah.
I mean, no one else had it. I mean, you had a monarchy in England, a monarchy in France, and these ideas were all dissident ideas in Europe. And the United States came along and said, wow, those are pretty good ideas. And we want to be independent. We're going to enact all these things, which meant that the US became the bastion of democracy, human rights, liberty, rule of law that it has been all these years.
Hmm.
And in fact, then, Europe in the 19th and 20th century basically followed suit. I mean, they took over these ideas and they've been quite successful in Europe. And now we see a rejection of those ideas on the part of the United States, a kind of going to this 19th century nationalism that which was really the reaction to liberal democracy in Europe, which in that reaction culminated in Nazism, frankly.
Yeah.
But there's
You
the
know, it's a case of instead of prodigal children, prodigal parents, right? The United States is sort of reenacting the worst political instincts and ideologies that Europe has discarded, or at least most of Europe has discarded.
but
Um,
I mean, this is why I take it all very personally, because it's
yeah,
very hurtful to see, on the one hand, these attacks as a European and who's devoted his life to sort of that, but also as someone who grew up in the United States. I mean, as I have told you, I mean, I had a green card in the United States and I won the Daughters of the American Revolution Best Student of American History Prize when I graduated grade school. So, I mean, so it's not as if like I don't know what the US is about.
right. And I think the thing that is most disconcerting, well, for me and people who pay attention to the world but are living in the United States, is that what we're talking about isn't just it was never a question of political party. This was bipartisan consensus. Nobody disputed. I mean, there were questions about NATO enlargement, of course, and which countries should join and which should not, and so on. But by and large, we
We're
agreed
going
that
to 80%. I mean, 80% of the Senate voted for it. So we're
right, right. And I should say, I mean, one thing I want to emphasize because the joke of late has been, as we used to say, or as we still say about Russia, the Kremlin has many towers. In other words, you have factions and boyars all vying for the influence of the Tsar, and Putin can be kind of manipulated and pushed in a certain direction. The same thing now abides in the United States. The White House has many towers, and not just that, but the U.S. government. We are not yet Turkmenistan, for instance. Like we can have still separation of powers. We still have a vibrant Congress. And just this week, right after this national security strategy dropped, the House released its draft National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year 2026. Sorry. And in this, we see a reaffirmation of all of the things that this White House national security strategy was repudiating. So, in other words, transatlanticism is doubled down on, right? The SACEUR, Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, should also be the commander of Europe, which is General Grinkevich, who's very robustly pro-NATO and is the guy responsible for authorizing deep strikes inside Russian territory using Western armaments, which is a recent kind of adaptation of what had been U.S. security assistance to Ukraine. It talks about the Baltic Security Initiative, something that matters very much to you and your neck of the woods. That is now codified or would be codified by an act of Congress. It talks about the Department of Defense having to report on a regular basis to Congress about all the weapons given to Ukraine, all the weapons that could be given to Ukraine that haven't been given, not just by the United States, but by the allies. And it also talks about, I mean, we're saying that Europe needs to rearm and all this. One of the mechanisms that was put together by the Trump administration and NATO, known as PEARL, P-U-R-L, is a system by which Europe or all NATO allies, so including Canada, of course, can buy weapons from the US and donate those weapons to Ukraine, right? Like Patriot missile systems and
right.
HIMARS and all the rest of it. So Pearl is also built into this thing. We want to know what our allies are paying for that only we can source. So you see more integration, you see a continuance of everything that has been kind of until recently gospel for U.S. defense and foreign policy as a matter of Congress. And the House of Representatives is Republican led. This is Republican led legislation. So you have people who tend to be more institutional and traditionally minded Republicans pushing back, however implicitly and coyly, against this kind of crazy. I don't even know what to call it ideologically. I mean, it's not
Well, we'll
isolationist
see.
if you're doing regime change in Europe, right? It's some kind of nativist, militarist sort of worldview. I think it's really an extension of America's culture war, projected onto the world stage, right?
Well, we'll see how it goes. I mean, the
Yeah,
Authorization Act for 2025 was also sabotaged by the Deputy Secretary, Undersecretary of Defense for Political Affairs, right? So,
right. But this one is written largely in response to some of these sort of saboteurs, right? I mean, this guy
uh,
Eldridge Colby is without his being named in the NDAA. It's very clear that they want him to be held to account in a way that he has not been with Congress. And you're beginning to see some demonstrations of spine on the part of the GOP. I mean, they obviously they forced Trump to capitulate on the Epstein files. So, I mean, my question to the Republican Party is if you're willing to go to the mattresses with Donald Trump over a dead pedophile, how could you not go to the mattresses with Donald Trump over 80 years of American-led security architecture in Europe? I mean, it doesn't.
well, but there is, I mean, well, maybe because I focus more on the negative side. I mean, there is hell of a lot of stuff coming out trashing Europe. The America First thing is easily turned into I would say, misguided understanding of what is good for America first, because
Mm,
basically what America alone is not in the interest of the United States. I mean, it was one of those things where it may feel good for a minute to go, but the reality when it sets in is not very pleasant. And I mean, and I see also on the part of Europe that yeah, you're going to see people saying, "Well, why don't we do more with the Chinese?" I mean, that's certainly is not my wish that we would be refocusing our foreign policy away from transatlantic relations. But there are enough people in Europe who will say, well, I mean, look, the message is clear. They
right,
don't want to deal with us. Why don't we deal with those who don't engage these days in wolf warrior
right. Transactionally
diplomacy
reliable partners. Exactly. Yeah.
and who, don't say these kinds of things. So,
Right. But
uh,
it's also important to emphasize for a so-called populist government, they're not really channeling the will of the people. I mean, if you look at the polls, even
right.
pro-Trump Republican voters overwhelmingly support Ukraine and more security assistance to Ukraine. Sanctions on Russia, they see Russia as the villain of this story. I'm sure the polling is similar about NATO, right? The EU is probably doesn't even factor into Americans' sort of political
No,
consciousness because they don't even know what the EU is. I mean, we've just spent a whole 45 minutes discussing it. But, the idea that America leads in an alliance of democracies, I mean, that's sort of scratched into the cerebral cortex at such a deep level that, to try and erase it seems almost a fool's errand. And yet you have these very loudmouth officials. And you notice, by the way, all of this stuff happened right on the back of this NSS, right? These people were not barking about, you had the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy, not very public and not very diplomatic, saying, I'm on a diplomatic passport in Europe. I'm allowed to say the following, and goes on Twitter. Everyone, nothing is stopping people from saying what she just said, but she's making it sound like she's living in Orwell's 1984.
and of course, as I pointed out, if you actually look at the where the U.S. stands on freedom of speech, book bannings, I mean, there are thousands of books are on the list of to be banned in the United States and have been banned.
Right,
Uh, and when you look at, on freedom of the press ratings, the my country is second in the world. Almost all of the EU is above the United States, which comes in at 57 between Sierra Leone and Gabon. But who's worse on press freedom than the United States, 10 points behind at 68, is Hungary, the poster child for the United States.
right.
It's like, I mean,
And
and of
we
course,
want to climb down the ladder, not up it, it seems, in these
but
rankings.
this is not lost on people. I
Right,
mean, it's and so it makes people like that deputy secretary for public diplomacy or non-diplomacy look utterly foolish. I
right.
mean, it's like I don't know what that is. I mean, especially I've had one of these things. Um, I have a black diplomatic passport. I've had it for 33 years because I've been in government all this time and never made any difference.
What
I
you could
shot my
say,
mouth
what you could
off
say.
with or
You
without.
got in trouble either way, exactly.
No, but I mean, no one's going to censor you. Come on. It's just, I mean, it's like you get this feeling like you just crossed Checkpoint Charlie in
Right.
1983 into Stasi land. It's like, what?
Right.
Uh,
And people don't really, I mean, even when a country's instincts are to do something that might erode civil liberties or these freedoms, there is the EU, if they're a member of the EU, stopping them from going down that road, right? I mean, at least to such a degree that, you create this sort of dystopian conception of, fallen Europe or whatever. And, this is not to romanticize every country. I mean, there are things about Denmark's tax code I don't like. I personally don't believe that Germany needs to have a law prohibiting Holocaust denial. I think, enough time has gone by and people can, say what they want. However, I understand why Germany, of all countries, has a law prohibiting Holocaust denial, right? And also fundamentally, this is not my business. These are sovereign
Well, on
nations.
top of that, it was, I mean, I mean, Germany's law was voted by the
It was
democratically
democratically
elected
decided. Exactly.
parliament. The
Exactly.
parliament decided. What are you going to do? Say Germans are all stupid or what? I don't know. I mean,
I mean, if we are to appreciate differentiation, even amongst our friends and allies, then we have to respect differentiation. I mean, there are plenty of things about the United States Europeans do not like, right? And there's lots of things about the United States they do like. But at the end of the day, it's not their business to decide what we do. And similarly, it's not our business to cultivate resistance in Europe. I mean, I still cannot get over that phrase in an American national security strategy. It's the kind
I
of
mean,
thing
what?
you think like the CIA's Special Activities Center is doing in Latin America or in Iran or North Korea. Suddenly, this is now baked into, sort of our grand vision for the continent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, imagine what the U.S. would react if the European Commission started promoting separatism on the part of
There you go.
California and New Jersey. We'll
Colexit,
take
yeah, and
we'll
Texit.
take Queens with us.
You can have Queens as long as we can station a few S-400s. Shoot down enemy aircraft. I think we'll be all right.
But no, I mean, it's just I just don't understand what the rationale is, and we'll see. I mean, where it will end up. I think that we're only beginning to see pushback from the European Union.
Hmm.
Uh, I saw Merz this afternoon here has already, basically been pretty annoyed.
Oh, he's furious in a way that you really don't want Germans to get furious, and you can tell in his tone and just his the mean he adopts when he's speaking about this. Yeah, look, I mean, I try not to be like Pollyannish about these things, but I will say the best possible outcome will be this. The implementation of this strategy is going to be so complicated and difficult and meet with so many domestic headwinds as to be probably, not possible, at least not to the extent they would like it to be. However, the optics of it are already creating exactly the kind of healthy opposition and resistance you would expect to see. The Europeans basically telling the United States, fuck off. We're going to now actually do what we've been threatening to do for a long time, which is, take matters into our own hands, take security into our own hands. And if that means standing by Ukraine as Donald Trump and his idiot son and cronies try to bludgeon it into submission, then so be it. If it means taking frozen Russian assets, which we control and the United States does not, and using it for Ukraine's defense, so be it. I mean, this is the other side of it. It's like we're not only telling Europe how they should conduct their affairs, we are negotiating with the Russians about Europe without consulting Europe, including how the EU is supposed to spend money on reconstruction efforts, not just in Ukraine, but also in Russia. You know,
No, it's
this is,
well, I mean, I think I do hope that the this gleeful support for the security strategy by the Russian leadership uh, does strike a chord among Americans. I mean, like, why do they like this?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
so
not a great look, not a great look. Um,
well,
but
in any
anyway,
case,
well, like I said, I needed a good rant from somebody I trust and admire.
that was not a rant. I
Well, it
thought that
was
was
it was an enlightened
a
rant.
completely rational discussion,
I was
evidence based.
I was trying to tap into the Jersey boy, not the Estonia boy, and I got a little bit of it. I should say,
Well,
like in Estonia, it's now a matter of great controversy and heated debate whether or not Estonians, for the first time, are engaging in small talk. And that gives you a sense of the degree of sang-froid and equilibrium that Estonians have. So to get Estonian temperature going, that usually means you've done something really
well,
provocative.
this has certainly gotten people quite upset.
Yeah.
I can tell you that it's not a It's not been met with our usual pro-American stance. I mean,
Right.
we have been traditionally one of the most pro-American countries in the European Union, and it is not it's falling flat. I mean, it's falling flat, really.
Yeah. Poland
So
too. I mean, Tusk and Sikorsky, the foreign minister, have been outspoken on social media. I mean, remember I think one thing we can agree Donald Rumsfeld got right was this notion of New Europe versus Old Europe, and New Europe
yeah,
was going to be the most pro-American, philo-American kind of block in the continent.
yeah,
And now we're alienating the very people who were desperate to be part of NATO, desperate to be under the American security
right.
umbrella. Shooting ourselves in the face, not even the foot. Anyway, Tom, always a pleasure. I know it's late where you are in Spain, is it?
Not that
Yes,
late. Yeah.
not that late. Yeah. Well, but thanks
But
for
it's time
joining
for
us.
dinner. It's time for dinner.
All right,
So,
well, enjoy. And I
uh,
hope to see you again soon and to chat with you again soon, privately and publicly, I should say. This is
okay.
public. So
Yeah. Let me know when you're off.
I will. This you've been listening to Foreign Office. I'm Michael Weiss. My guest has been the former Estonian president, Toomas Ilves, and we'll see you again soon.